idiot America. Welcome to a new kind of tension all across the alien nation. Everything is meant to be okay. Don't be like dreams of tomorrow. We're not the ones who meant to follow, for that's enough to want you.
As always, we'll first start with our COVID-19 update, but breaking away from tradition, let's instead talk about what is perhaps an underreported aspect of the disease. Since COVID-19 dropped with the controversial pandemic update, its long-term effects have been mostly clouded in mystery, but researchers have begun to slowly uncover the long-term effects of the virus. These effects can be as general as simple fatigue or fever, but have been seen to escalate to more serious symptoms, such as shortness of breath, chest pain, and heart palpitations. Perhaps the scariest are the neurological symptoms, which can include difficulty concentrating, brain fog, headaches, nausea, depression, anxiety, and changes in taste and smell. Alongside these prolonged symptoms, COVID is also capable of leaving long-term tissue damage, which can remain for far longer than the virus itself. Researchers have found that the virus tends to attack healthy tissue in the neurological, cardiovascular, and respiratory systems, as well as specialized organs such as the kidneys, liver, and the gastrointestinal tract. In fact, in some extreme cases, lung damage that remains post-COVID has been known to result in pneumonia. COVID has also been known to cause acute myocarditis long after the virus is no longer in an individual's body, which is when the virus essentially tricks your immune system into overreacting, which can cause your body to hurt itself in its confusion. This can lead to people who may have only felt mild symptoms, left with long-term scarring, or even organ damage in extreme cases. In the best case, this scarring will eventually heal, but leave the organ somewhat less productive than before. But in the worst case, the damage could lead to complete organ failure. It may take a long time still for researchers to fully understand the medical and societal effects of COVID-19, and with most of us on the news team having caught COVID previously, we really can't recommend this shit any less. Everyone on the team who's caught the virus has suffered some form of long-term effect, and it's legitimately scary to think how much this generation could suffer in the years ahead. In recent months, however, a new challenger has entered the ring, as monkeypox has made a Brandon Fraser-sized comeback. Monkeypox itself is nothing new, as it first originated in the Republic of the Congo in the 1970s, leading to a number of smaller outbreaks in temperate climate zones across the globe. The only reason monkeypox is making headlines today is because this particular outbreak has become far larger than those that came before, spreading to 27 nations as of time of writing. The good news is that although the virus tends to spread quite easily, simple smallpox vaccines have proved effective to stop the spread, and it's currently been mostly contained to Western and Central Africa. Most viewers probably won't have to worry about monkeypox anytime soon, but if the problem gets any worse, we'll be sure to let everyone know. In what might not be news to many people, the Chinese government still appears to be very harshly persecuting its ethnic Uyghur population. New evidence gathered at the tail end of May and published by a consortium of international media organizations confirmed once again that Uyghur Muslims within China were being imprisoned in huge numbers within large detention centers in the northwest Xinjiang region of the country. The newest batch of evidence includes over 5,000 photos of Uyghur people taken at police facilities, along with images from inside a detention center in Xinjiang. According to German anthropologist and expert on the treatment of Uyghurs within China, Adrian Zenz, the files were taken by a hacker from 2 local police agencies within China, which were then analyzed by Zenz himself before being handed to various media organizations. The files also include transcribed speeches attributed to 2 Chinese Communist Party officials, which were disturbing to say the least. One of these speeches urged local officials to treat all members of targeted ethnic groups as hardened criminals, which were to be arrested on site, shackled if necessary, and to shoot all detainees. who tried to escape. These files would coincide with a visit from the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, to the region, although Chinese officials would immediately dismiss all claims as lies and rumors. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbi would call these revelations, quote, the latest example of the anti-China forces smearing of Xinjiang. With this in mind, a reasonable person would assume that China would do everything in its power to disprove these claims and assure the world that its detention camps weren't committing one of the largest genocides the world has ever known. This, however, is not the case, as the United Nations were under extremely tight restrictions during their visit to the region, so much in fact that a US State Department representative publicly commented that the entire trip was a mistake. According to human rights groups, more than 1 million ethnic Uyghurs and other Muslim minority groups have been placed into detention camps within China, and there's been widespread evidence of sexual assault, torture, forced abortions, and sterilization within these facilities. Since 2021, the US government has officially labeled the Chinese government's treatment of Uyghurs as a genocide and has rejected the official excuse that the internment facilities are for re-education and counter-terrorism purposes. Make no mistake, a genocide has been taking place within China for around 8 years, and although we've personally seen countless news stories on the topic since starting this series 3.5 years ago, nearly nothing has actually been done to help those within these facilities or to sanction the Chinese government in any meaningful way. In other news, the now Taliban-controlled nation of Afghanistan is once again prohibiting the growth and cultivation of poppies within the nation. To understand why we should care about the farming policies of a tiny economy ruled by the Taliban, we need to take a quick lesson in drugs. Poppies are the natural source of the narcotic opium, the collection and use of which dates back more than 5,000 years, primarily for medicinal purposes. With this in mind, opium didn't fall out of favor with the advent of modern medicine, as it's still being used today as a base for potent pain relievers known as opioids, which are natural and synthetic drugs derived from opium. Fun spin-offs of the drug might be more familiar, greatest hits such as morphine, oxycodone, heroin, and fentanyl. Beyond medicinal use, opioids are the second most popular illegal recreational drug, only being beaten by the Snoop Dogg special. Across the world, an estimated 62 million people use opioids illicitly, with around 59% being genuinely addicted. This huge demand for opiates creates a large market for illicitly harvested and exported opium, and the great nation of Afghanistan has usually been happy to deliver. In a survey collected in 2021, it was found that Afghanistan produced around 6,800 tons of the stuff over the past year, which equated to 70% of the entire world's supply. In fact, opium serves as such a vital pillar to the Afghan economy. It's been estimated that it makes up as much as 14% of the nation's entire GDP. As you might imagine, opium is also one of the most profitable crops to grow within the nation, often selling for significantly more than other crops, such as wheat and cotton. This is where things get complicated. Highly addictive substances by their very nature have an inelastic demand, meaning people will buy that shit, even if it means going hungry. Food crops, on the other hand, at least within Afghanistan, tend to be much more variable, and a lot of the time, farmers won't even know whether they'll be able to break even on their yield and turn a profit at all. For an impoverished farmer trying to feed his family, oftentimes growing opium is the safest option to keep his head above water. This isn't to say that opium has always been the go-to crop for farmers wanting guaranteed cash. When the Taliban first took over in the 1990s, they prohibited the cultivation of opium nationwide, a policy which went mostly unenforced. This was until the late 90s, when they used their world-famous Taliban charm, which was so successful that the drug was almost entirely eradicated in under 2 years. Fast forward to 2001, and the US invasion of Afghanistan would see a new age of opium production within the country. Although almost non-existent throughout US-occupied regions, the Taliban would become more lenient on poppy cultivation, and instead, tax farmers to fund their insurgency effort. When the United States eventually pulled out of Afghanistan in August of last year, the Taliban had an uncertain policy when it came to poppy cultivation. Although they saw the huge negative effects on Afghan society, they recognized it served as a vital pillar to the Afghan economy, with millions within the nation relying on the crop to make a living. In their infinite wisdom, the Taliban would go on to take the worst parts of both options, as in April of this year, they would outlaw poppy cultivation altogether, right in the middle of the harvest season. This put farmers in a difficult position, where they could either attempt to harvest their crops and risk the punishment from Taliban enforcement squads, or destroy their crop, and very likely not have enough money to pay for basic living expenses. With the Taliban calculating how to make Afghanistan the most unpleasant country on earth to live, and with the international community cutting off 80% of the country's budget, made up of foreign aid, the job of a humble Afghan farmer has just become even more miserable. Regular viewers will probably know that we don't usually talk too much about American politics for obvious reasons, but this next story was too fun to not cover. The Texas Republican Party had their annual convention this month, and as the most American of all the American states, these guys weren't fucking around. Part of the convention was the release of a 40-page document detailing their official stances on a whole range of issues, and as someone who's never stepped foot in the United States in my entire life, it was a genuinely interesting read. Much of the document was living up to its reputation, with a statement asserting that all forms of gun control are in violation of the Second Amendment, that election fraud led to the current president being illegitimately elected, and that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 should be repealed. We are not going to be talking about any of these things today, because nestled within 40 pages of official policy stances, there's a single sentence that stood out more than anything. It reads, quote, "We urge the Texas legislature to pass bill in its next session, requiring a referendum in the 2023 general election for the people of Texas to determine whether or not the state of Texas should reassert its status as an independent nation." In simple caveman speak, this would mean Texans would vote on whether they would break off from the United States completely and become their own independent country. Students of history likely don't find this policy all too surprising, as Texas has a long history of secession and a proud reputation for independence. When Texas first seceded from Mexico in 1836, the state decided to become its own independent country for the next 9 years, until it would eventually become a US state in 1845. This would continue until 1861, when it seceded from the United States a second time, to protect its state's rights to do nothing in particular. Texas would later be readmitted into the United States in 1870, following the end of the Civil War. Ever since Texas rejoined the rest of the country, the state has been flirting with the idea of secession once again. Secession within the historically Republican state of Texas is usually brought up more frequently when the presidential office is held by a Democratic president, while in the Democratic stronghold of California, talk of secession occurs most when the opposite is true. People don't tend to talk about breaking away from a country if they are satisfied with how it's being run. In practice, secession would certainly mean a lot of changes, but for Texas in particular, it wouldn't be impossible. The economy of Texas alone is roughly the size of Russia. The state already has its own independent electric grid, and Texas literally has the nickname of the Lone Star State. Other challenges may not be so easy. For example, Texas would theoretically need to restructure its entire military and other government agencies, provide passports to the population, who may no longer be US citizens, and maybe have to invent its own Texas bucks. Experts also believe that seceding may not be able to happen peacefully, as deciding to break off from the United States would technically be illegal, but that would mostly come down to whether Uncle Sam would want to enforce these rules. What an independent Texas might look like is another question entirely. The state would no longer have to abide by federal labor and immigration laws, and as a result, Texas could become a manufacturing hub for the region, and its famously low taxes could entice large companies to move across the border for a bigger slice of the pie. In the United States, however, the political landscape would change forever. Without Texas, the country would very likely see the Democratic Party gain a lot more traction, which could in turn create a feedback loop of more red states wanting to be independent or even become part of Texas, a situation that sounds awfully familiar. Of course, this could never happen unless opinion polls showed clear support from Texas residents themselves, but the most recent polls we could find were from August 2016, just before Obama left office. When surveyed, 26% of people said they would support secession, while 59% were against. However, these results dramatically shifted when residents were asked how they'd vote if Hillary Clinton were president, which led to 40% being in support and 48% standing against the idea. With nearly 6 years between that poll and now, and with US political polarization seemingly at an all-time high, it would be interesting to know the results of such a survey in the current day and whether it could push Texas to try for a third time in its history.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
If you're a Texas resident, worried about no longer being a US citizen, you might be interested in today's sponsor. They say that change is as good as a holiday, but with a VPN, you can have a little bit of both. Surfshark VPN makes protecting your online privacy and watching prohibited Netflix shows easier than marrying your sister in Alabama, and you can rest easy knowing that your privacy is just as secure as your pure family bloodline. Gone are the days of having to get scammed for trying to download Shark Tale from a website run by people who would sell their own mother for a Wendy's chicken sandwich. Simply change your location to anywhere you like and appreciate a whole cornucopia of new media to enjoy. Signing up with the code on screen will give viewers an 83% discount, 3 months for free, and they are even giving away their antivirus for no extra cost during the entire month of June. As always, viewers who aren't 100% satisfied can back out in the first 30 days and get a full refund. Surfshark VPN, it's cheaper than the other ones. Meanwhile, a woman from Chicago is approved for affordable housing after waiting 29 years, and a woman who was trampled to death by an elephant has her corpse thrown into the air at her funeral by the very same elephant. At the tail end of this month, the United States Supreme Court made a series of rulings that will likely change the course of the nation for years to come. Most notably, the Supreme Court overturned the 48-year-old Roe v. Wade ruling, which had previously stated that the US Constitution generally protected a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. Going forward, the right to an abortion will not be protected by the Constitution, and instead, individual states will decide for themselves whether or not the practice will be legal. 13 states within the country have already restricted or removed abortion access within their jurisdiction. However, it's expected that the practice will be outlawed in around half of all states over the next 4 months. We've talked about the abortion discussion many times on this series before, but ultimately, it just comes down to a philosophical debate. Abortion opponents will argue that life begins at contraception, therefore, having an abortion is no different to killing another human being in the street. Abortion proponents, on the other hand, believe that life starts later in the pregnancy cycle. Therefore, legal abortion serves as an important tool for a woman's bodily autonomy and provides a myriad of both medical and overall societal benefits. In terms of how this decision might affect American citizens, this will mostly depend on which state a person lives, but according to an economist at Middlebury University, these changes will mostly impact women who are young and poor, and especially those who already have children. In the case of Carson v. Macon, it was ruled that federal funding cannot be withheld from religious-backed private schools. This was based around a school voucher system, where parents receive government assistance for their children to attend a school of their choosing. The developers ultimately determined that these restrictions led to a greater separation of church and state than intended. Next up was Vega v. Teco, in which it was determined that it is not a constitutional right for law enforcement to read the Miranda warning upon arrest. The Miranda warning is of course something you've probably heard a million times before, but the Supreme Court stated that reading a person their rights upon arrest was found to be too strong, and that mandatory Miranda warnings were overprotective of the Fifth Amendment. The fourth case was the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. In this case, the court concluded that state authorities didn't have the right to regulate concealed carry permits. This decision was made because New York previously required citizens to give a distinguishable reason to carry a concealed firearm, as self-defense couldn't be used unless there was reason to believe the person would be a potential victim of violent crime, as it was determined that the burden of proof for a citizen demonstrating that they need a firearm was unreasonable. The Supreme Court opted that such a law against concealed carry weapons would violate the Second Amendment. It should be noted that even after these US server patch notes went live, the Supreme Court was vocal in its intentions to reconsider many other precedents set by past cases, most notably Griswold, Lawrence, and Burgerfell. For viewers who aren't US policy nerds like Jack the Intern, these refer to the cases which protect an American's right to contraceptives, the right to form a same-sex couple, and the right to enter into a same-sex marriage. We don't tend to talk about the economy very often, mostly because it's a scary force of nature, and none of us are qualified to properly explain its mysteries, but today is an exception. The economy of the world has been in a state of uncertainty ever since the words COVID-19 started making headlines across the globe, but with vaccines now being produced and widely distributed, it seems as if this boss fight might have a second stage. With the price of food and petrol up across the globe, and with the consequences of our own actions creeping up behind us, the world could be primed for another large-scale recession. When Russia invaded Ukraine at the end of February, Western-aligned nations started sanctioning the ever-living shit out of Russia, which although sent Russia to the fucking shadow realm in terms of its economy, also had knock-on effects for the rest of the world. A large part of the sanctions on Russia were designed to limit their ability to sell oil to other nations, and when combined with global oil production not ramping up fast enough, in a post-lockdown world, the price of fuel was destined to increase to dizzying heights. The problem with higher fuel prices is that because pretty much everything on the road uses fuel to get anywhere, the transportation cost of all other items also tends to increase, leading consumers to pay more for the same products. These factors, mixed in with workforces still struggling from COVID-19 related complications, and some regions of China entirely shut down with its zero COVID policy, and we have a perfect storm for disaster. Stagflation, or stagnant inflation, is an important term to know when discussing the potential for a recession. Basically, as prices continue to increase, businesses start letting go of their employees, which leads to a less productive economy, which in turn makes prices even more expensive, in a dangerous feedback loop. In this kind of economy, prices continue to steadily rise, while wages and unemployment tend to stagnate, or even decrease. This cycle continues until the system eventually bounces back to a normal level of sustainability, as it has many times in the past. The good news is that unless this Russia bullshit gets out of hand, we are unlikely to experience a Fallout 4 style bottle cap based economy anytime soon, and much more likely, we'll just see higher prices and unemployment, mixed in with wages, that aren't likely to get better anytime soon. In technology, the European Union released its newest patch, set to greatly affect the meta on charging cables worldwide. On June 7th, the EU came to an agreement, stating that by late 2024, the USB-C type port will be the common standard for all electronic devices in respective EU countries. Everything from cell phones, tablets, headphones, cameras, video game controllers, and everything in between will all be cross-compatible for charging, utilizing one standard port, rather than whatever the fuck we are doing now. A notable exception to this ruling is for laptops, which have a delayed date of 2026, due to their more variable power requirements in charging. These newly written laws are designed to eliminate excessive waste, while also removing additional costs related to purchasing new cables. This isn't the only advantage, as USB-C is significantly faster than other existing charging ports in terms of both charging electronics and transferring data. While these rules will apply solely within the European Union, it is expected that these new laws will set the standard for a more widespread adoption, as the EU has very often shaped technology legislation worldwide. The European Union recently voted to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from the year 2035, and although this doesn't directly affect anywhere else in the world, the economies of scale in the automotive industry will very likely push car manufacturers to transition to electric much faster than they had previously intended. Viewers who are currently suffering at the gas pump can thank EU lawmakers for moving this shit along a little bit faster. As for the charging port standardization, this 10-year push in the EU has predictably upset the white, overpriced elephant in the room.
What? Your Grace! Your Eminence!
As it stands, Apple is the only major phone manufacturer to continue innovating their products by coming up with new and exciting ways to make their new ports incompatible with old cables. The company actually attempted to repeal the decision in November last year, arguing that it would hinder the development of future technology. These concerns were promptly dismissed by EU lawmakers, who said, quote, "Don't care, didn't ask." It's been rumored that Apple may simply remove its charging ports altogether in favor of releasing a proprietary wireless charging solution. However, this is merely speculation at this point in time. Viewers who have been playing dystopian news bingo are in for a treat, as the first half of this month saw a Google engineer present evidence that their internal chatbot had become sentient. Blake Lemoine, who works for Google's responsible AI organization, put forward a 21-page document this month showing a conversation between him and the chatbot, internally known as Lambda. Within these pages, Lambda performed a number of tasks designed to gauge its intelligence and understanding, while also arguing for itself why it should be considered sentient. Lambda is a specific type of AI called a neural network, which is designed to replicate the structure of the human brain. In simple terms, a neural network has a certain number of nodes which act as weights that the machine uses when making a decision. For this to work, however, an AI needs to be trained, a process that involves it trying to take a guess at predicting a target variable based on the given information, then being told whether they were right or wrong. This is a long and difficult process, but eventually, the AI is able to be used in an application like natural language processing, which is what Lambda was designed to do. When Blake Lemoine and an additional collaborator presented their findings to the higher-ups within Google, they were later dismissed after a short investigation, stating that they couldn't call Lambda sentient without first defining what sentience means. This is where things start to become complicated. As experts within the field will already know, proving that an AI is sentient is just as much of a philosophical question as it is an engineering challenge. Even if an AI can be trained to respond to questions in a convincing way, this doesn't necessarily mean that sentience has been achieved. The problem is that sentience itself is nearly impossible to define, and some philosophers would argue that we can't even prove if the other people around us are sentient, as they could simply be part of our own imagined reality. One long-held recognition of sentience comes in the form of the Turing test, which was invented by computer scientist Alan Turing in 1950. The Turing test simplifies the question of sentience by asking simply, can a machine talk like a human? To test this, a human judge talks to the AI over text, along with a number of real humans. To pass, the judge needs to be unable to identify the AI from the other human participants. Previous artificial intelligence has managed to pass this test using various cheese strategies, like pretending to be a paranoid schizophrenic, posing as a 13-year-old Ukrainian teenager, or simply deflecting questions back at the judge. True sentience, however, doesn't seem to have been achieved quite yet, as these methods seem to be closer to speedrunners completing Elden Ring in under 6 minutes, as opposed to doing it legitimately. As of time of writing, Lemoine is on administrative leave at Google, not because he brought these findings to the attention of Google management, but because he hired a lawyer to represent Lambda and got Congress involved in his discoveries. Our very own Jake the Analyst had actually done some previous research on artificial intelligence in the past, and personally believes that true sentience is still a while from being developed. With this in mind, if Blake Lemoine is right about Lambda, then Google might be knocking on a door of which no one knows what's on the other side. We now check in on Ukraine, which is unfortunately just as fucked as last month. the Russian military have continued their assault on the cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, which lie in the heart of the Donbass region in the far east of the country. If Russia is able to take these cities, then thousands of Ukrainian troops will be cut off without reinforcements, which will give Russia a strong foothold in the Donbass. In the south, a Russian advance to the port city of Odessa was pushed back by Ukrainian forces, momentum that Ukraine hopes to use to recapture Kherson, a city just north of Crimea. In the north, the Ukrainian military has officially liberated the city of Kharkov and have begun to push east. However, the destruction within the city has been severe, with over 2,000 buildings left completely destroyed. As a consequence of the war, the grain outputs of both Russia and Ukraine have taken a severe dive, and this shortage has started to severely affect the regions of sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. This is a bit of a problem, because nations such as Egypt and Nigeria were already struggling with a food shortage, while Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia would be forgiven for believing that shit couldn't get much worse. In the Horn of Africa, experts predict that 20 million people could go hungry by the end of the year, while the nation of Yemen already relies on international aid to feed 13 million people. Unfortunately, the agency that provides the most in aid, the World Food Programme, buys half of all of its wheat from Ukraine and has already been forced to suspend support to the war-torn nation of South Sudan due to this grain shortage. It's hoped that the upcoming harvest seasons in both the United States and India will be able to offset these losses, but recent droughts and heat waves will likely hinder production. Ukraine itself hasn't been without fresh support either, as since last month, the United States has promised an additional $1 billion in munitions and humanitarian aid, while the nations of Germany, Denmark, and the United Kingdom have also committed to further military support. China on the other hand have taken a different stance to the invasion, as leader of the country and beloved anthropomorphic bear, Winnie the Pooh, spoke publicly in support of the Russian invasion. This contradicts previous statements by the leader, who previously encouraged a ceasefire and even reprimanded Russia's illegal offensive campaign into Ukraine. Experts believe that this change in tone could be due to China's military buildup in the South China Sea, which is of course home to the nation of Taiwan, a region that China still believes it owns. This is of course pure speculation for the time being. If there's anything we can say for sure about this now 4-month-long conflict, it's that waging war is really fucking expensive. However, some Ukrainian soldiers have come up with a unique way of raising some extra cash. Through the messaging app Telegram, a member of the Ukrainian resistance announced that for a $40 donation, generous patrons can have their own personalized message written on a 152mm artillery shell. Since the fundraiser began, the platoon that pioneered this enterprise have reportedly raised around $18,000 as of time of writing, money which was enough to buy 2 Starlink systems, a pickup truck, and a thermal light. Welcome to an age where we can turn shitposts into legitimate weapons of war. With the news over, we thought we'd take a minute to give everyone a small update. As you likely already know, a lot of our funding for the news comes in the form of Patreon donations, which has allowed the team to grow to its current size and keep producing news so consistently. What viewers may not know, however, is that it also funds much bigger projects that we'd never have the opportunity to make if we had to rely on YouTube alone to get funded. In fact, we are currently working on around 5 long-term projects, which take around 6 months or more to make. So although we sometimes have months which have been light on regular releases, it's important for us to convey that we've literally never been this busy. Some of these projects are far more ambitious than anything we've ever attempted in the past, so we hope you'll enjoy them when we finally feel ready to show off what we've done. The good news is that we've also been working very hard on trying to optimize our workflow, meaning hopefully we should be able to produce videos more quickly going forward. Viewers who want to support the news, as well as our other long-term projects, can support us with the Patreon link in the description, as it helps a lot more than you might think. Once again, I'd like to thank every single person for watching the series, and on behalf of the entire team, I'd like to wish everyone a happy July of 2022.